with the story of Bickershaw, we're covering a year in the life of Bickershaw Country Park, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. It's really like a drama unfolding. That's how I like to think about it, of you know, the natural world throughout the 4 seasons of the year and how it changes. All the world's a stage, said Shakespeare, and all the men and women are merely players. And I want to take you onto the stage of Bickershaw Country Park. And on that stage, there have been many players over the past few hundred years, many different players from various walks of life. And back to the 18th century, it was farmers and their families and their livestock. And then it became landed gentry after a while. There were landowners, and they had various influences there. And then we had the industrialists and the mine owners during the 19th and the 20th centuries. And now, in the post-industrial age, it's the place where fishermen hang out, where trail bikers and 4x4 riders, for better or worse, ply their hobby. And it's a place where conservationists get involved, as we've heard from Matthew, and just local people with a liking for the outdoors. So first, I think we'll have a little bit of an overture to this drama. Yeah, that last, well, I suppose that's the first character in the drama, really, but we're not going to talk about him yet, but it may have surprised you. But anyway, more about him later. Let's move on to a discussion about a little bit about the geography of Bickershaw Country Park. Incidentally, I just wanted to ask, is the colour looking all right on the screen?
Yes, it is. Paul,
it is. It's just that I use my computer for astrophotography, and it's gone into a sort of night mode on the screen here, which is a rather sort of dull pink color to stop destroying my night vision when I'm using it outside. And I was just hoping that it wasn't all a sort of dull pink for you, but anyway, seems to be all right. That's good. So here we have the Google map sort of aerial view of Bickershaw Country Park. If you know it, if you know the area, this is Smith's Lane and Bickershaw Lane up here at the top, and that's Diggle Flash and the stock pond there where the fishermen hang out. This is Fir Tree Flash here, down in the middle there, and down at the bottom is Nevison's Flash, or Tinker Joe's as it's sometimes called. These red outlined areas are the sites of biological importance, SBIs. So that's new water, if you know that one. You might have walked your dog around there or something. And here, this area that I've outlined in black here is actually the higher country in the middle of the park, which is actually on the edge of the park, I suppose. That's actually the top of the ruck, the old coal spoil heaps, which was leveled off and is still there's still a lot of exposed coal shale there and some woodland in the middle. It's higher than the rest of the site, and it's actually quite difficult to get up to in some places. And then if you see the country park, therefore, is like a sort of question mark shape, almost like this, with a big top question mark at the bottom there. And then there's this area on the left-hand side here on the southwestern quarter, if you like, which is a very large area of meadow surrounded with woodland on its edge at the bottom here. This is really to the north of Crankwood Road, which is down here. And that's the area where Jean and I have got interested in recently and been doing a lot of botanical work over the last year. So we'll have a little bit to say about that, even though it's actually outside of the area of Bickershaw Country Park and may not, at least at first, be a part of the National Nature Reserve. It's an area we've spent a lot of time in over the last year. The next slide shows Bickershaw Country Park in the context of the local area. Here is, oh, the pointer's not showing, sorry. Okay, I'll have to talk it then and not point it. Sorry, I've been using the pointer, so you may not have picked that up, but it's obviously not showing. Okay, in the circle in the middle, that's Bickershaw Country Park, and you can see the surrounding area perhaps a little bit more easily on this slide, and you can see how it relates to Wigan Flashes, top left there. Amber's Wood is a little bit to the right of that, and then it comes down from Wigan Flashes to Lightshore, Pennington Flash, and Bickershaw is immediately due north of Pennington Flash. And you can see how that fits in. All that area from Wigan Flashes and Amber's Wood down through Lightshore to Pennington Flash with Bickershaw to the north is the area of the proposed National Nature Reserve. The other thing it shows is Pickley Green and Lilford on the right there, and Gibfield at the top right. And that the reason I put those on is they are other green areas and other sort of post-industrial areas, and they form a sort of corridor up towards the West Pennines, the moorland up in the north. So you've got these wildlife corridors which really need to be preserved at all costs. And Gibfield itself is under threat from the Places for Everyone scheme. It's going to be turned into a sort of industrial estate and some housing. So there's a lot of work to do in trying to protect these areas. Most people don't need me to remind you that these were the scenes around Bickershaw Colliery in the mid-20th century. And I'm sure, like me, you can still remember the weeks when the mine shafts were being filled in after the mines closed, sometime in the 1990s, I think it was, when they were tipping these truckloads of rubble into the empty mine shafts, pouring it down the shafts day after day, night after night, for a week or 10 days. And you could hear this sound, echoing across the environment. It's a very, very eerie time, really. So obviously the performers in that act of the drama, to go back to the drama idea, have left the stage now. There's Bickershaw Colliery on the right at the top there, and the original rucks which have been profiled and rescued. So what have they left behind? What have the original players left behind? Well, the backdrop and the scenery has become very different from the photos we've just seen. After a massive reprofiling project, which went on really pretty much outside the knowledge of most of us, I think, in the 1990s. Certainly I was scarcely aware of the area really as anything special, that it hardly existed, according to my knowledge at that time. I used to drive down Smith's Lane on my way to the medical on-call service at Abram, and I used to see this area to the left, and there was I could see that there was a pond there, and I just wondered if you could walk there or if you could go there, and it was a long time before I actually explored it. And this is actually a picture of mine from the top of the ruck looking down towards the area which is now New Water, a good few years ago now, and it's changed a lot. It's become much more mature as a landscape, and of course a lot of it was spoiled by the 4x4, the big 4x4 vehicles, the big Land Rovers and things that used to use it. That's become a bit less now. I think it's more quad bikes and trail bikes now. But things have changed a lot just in those 12 years or so since that photo was taken. And this is what the background scenery at Bickershaw looks like now. There are still parts where mining spoil can be seen, but there are other areas where, to my mind, you could almost be on some sort of untouched Suffolk heath. And this is New Water, which I think is one of the most scenic areas right in the centre of the country park. And Lancashire Wildlife Trust have over the last few years done some very creative work at New Water, both in reprofiling and re-landscaping, and also trying to prevent the 4x4s and the trail bikes getting in with varying degrees of success. It's really, really hard to prevent people getting in for any length of time. They'll find a way in somehow. But it's very beautiful and usually very peaceful around New Water. But the funny thing is, it's, you know, the scenery is there, but there aren't many players on the stage, if you like. There isn't much wildlife. There's not much on the water. There's not much going on. And presumably that is because in New Water, there aren't many invertebrates. There aren't many insects and worms and things in the water yet, colonizing the mud. And although you do see birds on passage, you don't see large numbers of waterfowl, which you might expect on a water body like that. I mean, there have been greenshank, avocet, and snipe and lapwing, and a few other waterfowl at times. But more about this as we go through. You may not know the way into Bickershaw Country Park. Well, here's one of them. That's the entrance that's on Plank Lane that leads to Nevison's Flash. And then looking very similar, there's one of the entrances, that's the Edna Road car park. And on the left there, just a glimpse through the trees, is Fir Tree Flash. And that's the way in if you're wanting to go along Fir Tree Flash. And this is probably, I don't know, maybe the best known of all, because this is the famous road to nowhere, and that leads off Smith's Lane. You can't drive down it, but it's a great place to push a buggy or to ride a bicycle. And it goes, of course, as the name suggests, exactly to nowhere. It ends up in the middle of the park, and it just peters out. The idea was, I think, originally that perhaps there was going to be a golf course at the bottom there, or a visitor centre or what. But anyway, nothing transpired of that plan. And that's one of the main ways of getting in. And you can see just on the left there, the Bickershaw Country Park signboard there, one of the 2 or 3 signboards that are up. When you get into BCP, you find some good paths, yes, but the landscape is wild, I think, if you compare it with, say, Penningston Flash, which really looks quite suburban by comparison. And this is Nevison's Flash area, which is just to the left of the path as you walk in from Plank Lane. A huge reed bed now, which can be the stage for some surprises, as we'll see as we go along. Off the tracks, you can easily lose yourself. It's a huge area. You need to pay attention to direction finding and landmarks. If you get lost on the rucks or in the woods, you never quite know what you might find or what might happen. There might be some mysteries yet on the stage. So we'll start off with a winter scene, and we'll start with the main drama, Act 1, Winter. Walking in Bickershaw in winter can be a bleak experience and even sometimes a bit desolate. But there's something good about that, isn't there? It's good to be able to get out into the countryside and to experience real winter. The actors in the drama can be quite slow to show themselves in the winter time, but robins and wrens obviously are around. Flocks of blue tits, great tits, maybe a lesser redpoll or two among them. Rather more obvious sometimes, the noisy black-headed gulls over Fir Tree Flash, seen in this picture on a very frigid day last winter. Fir tree flash, while we're there, can actually sometimes be a good place to see pochard, which are very attractive type of duck. There's the male. You get groups of maybe 6 or 8 pochard at times, and it's a fairly small body of water. So with some patience, even though there aren't any hides there, you can get sometimes quite close enough for a reasonable photo. Little bit more shy and retiring on fir tree flash, the little grebe. They're certainly regular characters on all of Bickershaw's water bodies, and almost certainly breeding on almost all of them. I've certainly seen young little grebe on Nevison's flash as well as fir tree flash, which is a lovely thing to see. And this is another of the Bickershaw bodies of water. This is a less well-known one, variously known as the Old SBI, or the Flooded Grassland, or with our dear LOS friend Dave Wilson has christened it Paradise Pond, because I think he was there one day when he could just hear the waterfowl whistling, and it was a lovely sunny day, and he just thought he was in paradise. Well, I agree with that. It's a lovely spot, but it's an obscure spot in the middle of the park. It's you need someone to show you where it is, really. It's a difficult place to actually see any water birds unless you can walk up onto the rock that you can see in the background there, which is very steep. You can get up from various other areas and get a view over the water. And sometimes shoveler, little grebe, tufted duck, maybe other waterfowl, as well as the teal, which are usually heard rather than seen, the whistling teal. Teal seem to love that combination of sort of flooded trees and water, and they go in and out of the trees, and you don't hear them, but you don't see them, but you hear them whistling. It's an area that used to be just a winter flood, but it's really developing into a sort of permanent flash. An interesting example of how a flash actually evolves, really. And we're back here with new water, as scenic as ever on a bitingly cold winter day. Not much in evidence, perhaps as usual, from the normal public side of new water. But last winter, there was an unexpected guest for a few weeks, and that was in the form of a female goldeneye, another lovely kind of duck. I say unexpected because new water is very, very shallow, but actually if you walk around the back, which is a very inaccessible path, there's a pond in amongst the reed beds, which must be quite a bit deeper, because this goldeneye was quite happy feeding there for 2 or 3 weeks, and we saw it several times. And that the same pond does hold tufted duck, teal, gadwall, and little grebe from time to time, as well as mute swans. And also there's a Chetty's warbler that's taken up residence on the scrubby island in the middle, just by this pond. So it's like a sort of mini wilderness within a wilderness, if you like, because it's quite inaccessible. Far more obvious winter characters on the stage are the winter thrushes. Only a few weeks ago, when we were finishing off our botanical survey in the southwestern meadow, we saw 35, 40 redwing and heard a couple of fieldfares. But you'll often see quite big flocks of them, up into the hundreds sometimes, usually very often taking flight before you really notice them. But you see them going high and away, perhaps to another part of the park, because they tend to be very shy and retiring. Just occasionally you get one that puts on a little bit more of a display for you and sticks around for you to get a photograph. Another one of the reliable characters on the Bickershaw stage, but another very shy one, very difficult to photograph, is the grey partridge. But you can flush them virtually anywhere in the grasslands from time to time. They aren't there in massive quantity, but we ran into a pair more than once on the southwestern meadow as we were doing botany, and flushed them. And then a few weeks later, we found that there was not just a pair, but there were actually 14 there. So they'd obviously had a big brood of young, and it's fantastic to have breeding grey partridge, because they are a species whose numbers decline nationally. This picture is a bit of a cheat, because it wasn't taken at Bickershaw, it was taken down on Astley Moss at the time when they were releasing partridge for hunting down there. So it's a bit of a cheat shot, really, but it helps us out in identifying the species. You know, a lovely looking bird. And here's a little bit more about the story of the Highland cattle. I think, if I remember rightly, somebody may be able to put me right on this, I think there were 9 originally at Bickershaw a year or 2 ago. They were brought in to graze the eastern meadows on the edge of West Leigh, and they really made a difference. They graze the grassland in a particular way, which is creative for biodiversity and for wildlife. They denude some areas of soil so that the redwings and the Fairfield and the fieldfares can come in and get some snacks. And you could really tell that the birds were liking them being there. Unfortunately, some of them have got old and passed away, and the group has become much smaller. And I think they've been out on other places like Cutacre and Lightshaw meadows. They may, I think, at some stage come back to Bickershaw, but I'm not sure about that. But it was fantastic to be able to see such creatures in a local area near to home. Kestrel's a regular sight on winter walks in the area, but it was very unusual to be able to get locally to get to a picture of a kestrel perched on the ground just within a few yards of a Highland cow or a Highland bull. I'm not sure which one it was. Amazing to see. The other thing I would like to big up the Lancashire Wildlife Trust really for the incredible work that Matt was talking about earlier about Slow the Flow project. This is the original project which was done 3 or 4 years ago, and really is looking great now. I mean, this type of landscape that used to be just a straight, steep-sided drainage ditch, and they've created, with the help of the Environment Agency and some very heavy machinery, these wonderful meandering streams, and they are becoming in themselves good places for wildlife, because water voles have been seen along their banks. A few weeks back I flushed a common snipe from the banks of one of them, and as well as photographing this lovely grey wagtail, which seemed very much at home in what looks like a very natural and suitable habitat after just a couple of years now. It's greening up nicely from the work that they did, and I'm sure what's been done recently will do the same. Some more background scenery of the stage of Bickershaw, the dramatic views that you can get from some of the higher parts of the park on the edge of the ruck. With a telephoto lens, you can really bring the distant Derbyshire hills to make them look as though Butts Mill in Leigh is actually nestling at the foot of the hills in the snowy winter air, the really clear winter air. And there's Leigh Town Hall, actually against the high buildings of Manchester city centre, with the hills of Bleaklow, the Derbyshire moors behind. Really quite something. But it's high time we moved on with the seasons, because it's the time of year now that the sap is rising. The great crested grebe at Fir Tree Flash is definitely getting frisky, and spring is in the air. So we'll have a little springtime music. So we've arrived back at Nevison's Flash for the next act in the drama. This particular act involves thousands of birds, and it's spring, and it's a roost, or I suppose you could call it a murmuration. But with murmurations, we usually think about starlings. Well, these are either very high up and very tiny starlings, or there's something else. and they are, of course, actually something else, but there are a lot of them. And this is a spring murmuration, a spring roost. This happened for a couple of weeks in early April 2017, and maybe you got a chance to see it if you were there. I don't know that the call gives you any clue. I don't think it would have given me a clue. But these are actually sand martins, and they came in their thousands for several evenings in the spring of 2017 to roost in Nevison's reed bed. I presume this was before, this was after, I mean, they're migrant birds, so they'd arrived in the country. I presume this is before they paired up for breeding, because, you know, when they're breeding, they're roosting obviously in their nesting sites. But in thousands, presumably before they bred, they were coming from feeding during the daytime over Pennington Flash to roosting at Nevison's reed bed, and it really was quite a sight. And from night to night, there was often a sparrowhawk that was lurking around and trying to take some of them. But it was really amazing to see them wheeling around. Not quite the balletic beauty of the starling murmuration, but quite something to see. And as you heard, it's quite a noise too, to see them going down into the reeds and to hear them chattering to each other. I think it has happened once or twice since, but not to the extent that it did in 2017. But it would be well worth watching out in April next year, if anybody has the chance to do that. Well worth keeping an eye out just at dusk to see whether it happens again. The next character on the stage, I think, is the famous one, and that's the willow tit. You may be lucky enough to hear or see them if you're out walking in the spring at Bickershaw, and spring is definitely the time to see them, and the time, in my mind, to visit Bickershaw too. And there's no doubt that if these areas do succeed in becoming a national nature reserve, the willow tit will have to take a lot of the credit, because, as you probably know, they're one of the fastest declining UK birds, and yet Wigan and the Wigan flashes and Pennington flash, Astley moss and Bickershaw are a stronghold of the willow tit, which is of national significance. There are at least 7 breeding pairs at Pennington flash, and I very much doubt if anyone really knows how many there are at Bickershaw. Quite likely just as many or even more. Very hard to see sometimes, but their call is very characteristic. Very different from a blue tit or a great tit call. So if you hear that sort of a noise and you look out, and there's this little sort of pinky buff colored bird with a lovely smart black cap. The only similar bird really is a coal tit, but the coal tit has a white stripe down the middle of its black head, so particularly at the back. So that's the thing to look out for, really. The next bird on the stage is the skylark, and up till recently, the skylark has been a main player at Bickershaw, and you will still see them over the grassland, particularly either side of the road to nowhere in the spring. And I'm sure probably there are still some breeding pairs there, but how many, I don't know. They certainly are nowhere near as common as they were even when I started bird watching, which is perhaps only about 12 years or so ago. The main reason that they're not as common, apart from a national decline, is the fact is really what you can see under the feet of this perching bird, which is on a hawthorn bush. The grassland habitat at Bickershaw is very much in danger of being lost through progression to scrubland. And over the last few years, a lot of volunteers have done some great work in clearing hawthorn and willow scrub from some quite big areas, but it's intensive work. And hence, I think the need for us to consider the expansion of cattle grazing really at Bickershaw. Unfortunately, grazing means fencing, and fencing is very expensive. And I just hope that perhaps if we do get National Nature Reserve status, we can get some funding for more fencing to be put around larger areas of the precious Bickershaw grassland, because, you know, it really would be tragic to lose this wonderful sound from the locality. And at one time, again, even when I first started birding, I would have shown you a picture of a meadow pipit next. And with where there are meadow pipits, there are cuckoos, because cuckoos parasitize the meadow pipit nest. That's one of their favorite birds. They will lay their eggs in reed bunting nests as well. Well, there are still quite a lot of reed buntings at Bickershaw, but the meadow pipit, unfortunately, is becoming much, much rarer. And maybe because of the scarcity of meadow pipits, the cuckoo is heard less frequently now too at Bickershaw. Used to be one of the best places in the area to hear them or see them. I will admit that this is another cheat picture taken at Silver Lane rather than at Bickershaw. But there it is, it's a cuckoo. I just thought my sound had gone wrong, but I think it's hail against the window in the room where I'm speaking. And here's a happier story than the meadow pipit story. And this is the linnet. This is a lovely male linnet on a hawthorn bush. They are still breeding at Bickershaw, although their numbers have crashed in the local area at large. You won't see nearly as many around the local area at large, but you can still see them at Bickershaw. Especially on a very beautiful east-facing bank of shrubs overlooking Nevison's Flash, and that's a part of it there. You see the beautiful flowering shrubs in the spring there, overlooking Nevison's Flash. Not just linnets in that scrub, whitethroat, dunnock, robins, blackbirds, they all nest there, and it's alive with birds in the spring. And we'll come back to it in a bit, and we'll see a little bit of something else that's found there. The main cast members, if you like, in the drama in the spring are the warblers. These are the migrants that come in the spring and arrive and nest, and a lot of different types of warblers nest in Bickershaw in the spring. But one of the first one we'll mention is actually not a migrant. It actually stays all year, but it's fairly much of a newcomer to the area, and it's called the Chetty's warbler. You wouldn't have seen a Chetty's warbler anywhere in this area, let alone at Bickershaw 15 years ago, but they have moved in, and they're moving into the country at large, and they're characterized by being incredibly difficult to spot. They spend most of the time skulking in the undergrowth. This was not another one that wasn't at Bickershaw. It's actually at the western end of Pennington Flash, which actually showed itself for a photo. But what normally gives it away is this amazing explosive call, which you just can't miss it at all. It's really hard to mistake that for anything else. Unfortunately, that clip is a little bit too short, but if you look up Chetty's warbler call on the internet, I'm sure you'll find something more to listen to. And even if you never see a Chetty's warbler, you hear that wonderful call, and you'll know they're around. They stay, as I said, all year, but you hear them much more in the spring because they're announcing their presence and looking for a female. Oh. Glad that came up again. But the first warbler to arrive, the first migrant warbler to arrive in the early spring is the chiffchaff. This one obviously didn't have much mouth left to sing with, but I think this was perhaps a little bit later in the season when it was feeding young. But the characteristic call of the chiffchaff is another easy one to learn. That's where it's supposed to be saying chiff chaff, and of course they will go on and on saying that. It perhaps even gets a little bit monotonous, but it's a wonderful thing to hear because you know that spring is really in the air. And the next one on the stage is the blackcap, which has an even more wonderful song, and of course is sometimes referred to as the northern nightingale. It's not quite the quality of the nightingale song, but it is a really lovely thing to hear. This particular individual, this male blackcap, is one of the most consistent pairs in the whole area. just inside the walking gate to the country park on Plank Lane, just in the trees there. And it's certainly been there nesting every year for the last 4 or 5 years and singing its heart out. It's really a great singer. So that's a good place to go to hear a blackcap. The next one is the willow warbler. Arrives end of March, beginning of April. And they're well represented at Bickershaw, often easy to see, particularly in the early part of the season before the leaves get too thick. And at first you thrill to hear the willow warbler song, but it becomes after a while quite commonplace. But it is a lovely thing to hear in the early spring. Very characteristic descending scale. Again, there's nothing else really that has a song quite like that. The common whitethroat, which is the next warbler, is not quite so tuneful. It tends to be rather more described as a scratchy song, but the common whitethroat is everywhere at Bickershaw, particularly easy to see in April and May. There are a lot of them, and on that bank I was telling you about, overlooking Nevison's Flash, particularly, there are several nesting pairs, I think. And here is the song. Not quite so tuneful as some of them, but not too difficult to learn. Later in the season, they do tend to become a bit more skulking, shy and retiring, especially when the leaves are on the trees and they've got maybe a brood of young, but they're still there and still nice birds to see when you catch sight of them. The next warbler on the stage, well, I show you a picture of of Dave Wilson's Paradise Pond here, shown from the top of the ruck, and that white patch in the middle distance there, the light coloured patch, is actually a field area of long grass where grasshopper warblers sometimes are seen, which is the next one to be shown. I don't apologize for the quality of this picture. It's a terrible picture, but grasshopper warblers are very, very difficult to take pictures of, to get close to. I've seen some local bird photographers who've got great pictures of grasshopper warblers, but I haven't got one to show you. But I quite like that. It's a bit like a sort of watercolor in a way, isn't it? And here's if you have any hearing loss at all in the high frequencies, which I certainly do, you'll find out in the field where there is wind and ambient noise, it's actually very, very difficult to hear these. It's a little bit easier on the computer. And of course, from that you can hear why it's called a grasshopper warbler, although actually it's a much more continuous. The grasshopper itself is more of a chirp, chirp, chirp noise, obviously, but it's like a grasshopper, but it's continually reeling, and that can go on for many, many minutes at a time. I really don't know how it does it, but it's an amazing bird. Still going down the cast list of warblers, this character is not often completely silent, at the height of spring at least, and this is the sedge warbler. That's much more like it. Far easier to hear, far more obvious than the grasshopper warbler. A very sound with many different notes and levels of notes in it. This one was just on the edge of the reed bed at Nevison's Flash this year and last year, and very, very showy and lovely to just stand near that and watch it and listen to it. Fantastic birds, very, very full of character, feisty little birds. Much more shy and retiring are the reed warblers. That was a sedge warbler. This is a reed warbler, but this was another bird of Nevison's Flash, and this was a reed warbler who actually, well, I mean, very often you hear them and you don't even see them at all. This one actually showed itself. It wasn't particularly flashy looking. It was actually a little bit scruffy looking, but did it have a song? And all of the clips I've played to you up to now have been taken from the internet, but this next clip is actually on a video which I took at Nevison's Flash itself, and it actually does show the birds singing. It's a little bit jumpy because with a telephoto lens, taking video without a tripod is not recommended really, but if you can bear with the jumpiness, it's worth listening to. And he may be a bit scruffy, but what a fantastic singer. With a voice like that, I'm sure he found a mate. I'm trying to go on with that. Oh, here we are. Yeah, I was talking earlier on. This again is that lovely bank overlooking Nevison's Flash. I was talking earlier about the different birds that nest there, and there was one which Dave Wilson and Gordon Newman found this last year, which was particularly fantastic to listen to. And you won't see this bird on this particular video clip, but you will hear it. What a wonderful singer. He just went on and on and on and on. The video goes on much, much longer than this clip that I've included. A little bit like the blackcap song, it was actually a garden warbler. And the garden warbler, a bit like the Chetty's warbler, it's a bird that is much, much more often heard than seen. Sometimes very, very difficult to actually catch a glimpse of. Actually move. Yeah, this one actually did show itself on the top of a birch tree just before I made that recording. So that was fantastic to actually get the opportunity to see a garden warbler. I mean, they are very unassuming looking birds. They take being nondescript to an art form, really. You know, there's nothing very special that you can say about what it looks like, but the sound is just wonderful. I had the idea, because I'd heard it done in other places, of slowing down this song because it's such a chirruping, sort of fast song. I had the idea of just slowing it down. You can do that with various apps on the internet, and hearing what it sounded like, because you can hear a little bit more of the different notes and the character. So this is what it sounds like, slowed down to about half speed. Amazing noise, but it sounds almost like something underwater. So they are tremendous little singers. So we've been down the whole list really of Bickershaw warblers in the springtime drama. The next scene in the drama is more of a human story. Jean and I were on a gentle stroll with some friends from Pennington Church, showing them off some of the delights of Bickershaw. People will always say, if they've not been there before, that they had no idea that such a large area of open country existed in the local area. Well, we had a lovely walk, a few birds here and there, nothing very spectacular. But you always hope there'll be something a bit special when you take friends around, don't you? And what do you know? We were just passing between Diggle Flash and the stock pond, and somebody looked up and said, "Are those couple of buzzards up there having an argument or something?" And lo and behold, it was not a couple of buzzards, it was a buzzard arguing with an osprey. Well, you can see anything anywhere when it's migration time in the spring, and this was one of the most exciting local sights I think I've ever had, an osprey passing over Bickershaw Country Park. Out came the binoculars, and yes, that was confirmed. I didn't even have because we were with friends, I didn't even have my camera, my big camera with me. I just had a mobile phone. But Jean had a camera and managed with her quick reactions to zoom in to 70mm, which was the maximum she had, and managed to catch this shot of it, the osprey at the top there and the buzzard below. We thought it looked as though it was just getting itself ready to dive into the water for a fish, which would have been spectacular because it was really close by. But whether the buzzard spooked it or whether we spooked it, I don't know, but it gave up the idea of diving and just drifted majestically off in another direction. But that was a fantastic sight. So the spring drama is unfolding. The plot is twisting and turning, and we've reached the theme of botany. And as I said earlier, it's been a year of botany for Jean and me. And the reason is because we found this large area to the southwest, which was so rich in different flowers. Not particularly rich in birds sometimes, but what it lacks perhaps in wildlife, it makes up for in spades with flowers. Here's the bee orchid, which is found in the drier areas on some of the slopes. And we move into other orchids up in the more waterlogged parts, which no doubt at one time were covered to some depth with colliery spoil. These glorious flowers, various different types of orchids seen in huge numbers. This is an early marsh orchid, which ranges from this delicate sort of fleshy pink to a much deeper salmon color. And then these are the classic northern and southern marsh orchids on this sort of wet fen area up on the southwestern meadow. If you talk to Mark Champion about northern and southern marsh orchids, he'll tell you all you want to know about them, because he actually did his PhD on the subject, and he'll tell you how they hybridize together sometimes, and that Wigan is one of the wider Wigan locality is one of the best areas for seeing hybrids between northern and southern marsh orchids. I'm not going to even try and tell you which one this is, but it's a close-up of one of them. The closer you get, the more beautiful they are, really, and the more you appreciate them. You find yourself wondering at the way that this sort of ugly post-industrial waste has been replaced by such botanical riches. It can be very lonely at Bickershaw, but you never can know quite who you're going to meet. In the distance here's somebody who's obviously enjoying the nature. We got a little bit closer, and in this case, the natives are friendly. It's Dave Wilson from the LOS, and the reason he's on this show is because he was the guy who first showed us this southwestern meadow area, because he and some friends had found, well, in this case, he's found a bee orchid and he's taking a picture of it, but what he took us up there originally for was to see these characters, which is the beautiful pyramidal orchid. And they had found a very few of these in a particular area near a particular bush right in the middle of this southwestern meadow. And I'm glad to say that this year, I mean, this was 2 or 3 years ago, this year we found, I think, in excess of 40 of these beautiful pyramidal orchids. And Alan Cargill will remember being up there and seeing them too, all in just one very tiny area, and 1 or 2 in other areas too, but not in that sort of a number. Beautiful things to see. Not particularly rare, I don't think, nationally, but certainly not that common in the Wigan area. And then another beautiful orchid, much more vigorous, much more common, the common spotted orchid. We saw these 3 sisters, if you like, growing beautifully under a willow tree, and we followed them as they matured and they became in full flower. Just to see a little bit more of the botany, there's a plant of the water avens, which is, again, not a national rarity, but not very common locally. Just one plant in our survey on the edge of the area, one of the waterlogged areas. And in the more grassy, drier areas, this is another shy beauty, the grass vetchling. You can probably tell it's a member of the pea family. It's a tiny flower, but it's rather like a sweet pea. They're easier to see, really, when they've got their black seed pods. There are quite a few of them scattered among the long grasses, and again, not a common plant at all locally. But as we move on through the seasons, here's another Bickershaw speciality, the dragonflies. Late spring sees the first early flyers appearing around the pond margins and the wet grasslands. This is a broad-bodied chaser. And the orchids are coming to an end, and the birds fly forward. Time to bring on summer. Summertime, when the living is easy. Well, the living may be easier, but the birding gets harder, as anybody who is a regular birder will know. The leaves are all on the trees, the birds are busy feeding their young, and after they finish feeding their young, they're skulking away and molting, and much more difficult time to go birding. It's not very common to get a wonderful sighting like this when, again, when Jean and I were doing some botany on the edge of a reed bed. We got a juvenile reed warbler who was actually coming really to see what we were doing. The young birds are sometimes very inquisitive. And I was, I think, trying to actually get further away from this bird to make it possible to take its picture. And a wonderful sighting there in the reed bed. Dragonflies are much easier to see in the summer at Bickershaw than birds. If you can get past the camouflage in this picture, this is a mating pair of black-tailed skimmers on the mud at New Water. So the Bickershaw drama has romance in it. It doesn't get much more romantic than a pair of black-tailed skimmers in the mud, does it? Another botanical day brought me this wonderful four-spotted chaser, another of the really showy, beefy dragonflies. And then another incident where we had some friends with us, some folks visiting from the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, and we really wanted to impress them. And here was a female emperor dragonfly actually laying her eggs in a puddle, which was there because of some old 4x4 activity. So the wheel ruts from the 4x4s have created this pond. And there was this female emperor dragonfly, but probably better still, as we were standing talking, this wonderful male emperor actually came and alighted on the reeds just on the edge of this puddle, and just stayed there for some minutes as we all enjoyed the view. Absolutely stunning creature. It's the first time I think I'd seen an emperor dragonfly locally, and it was certainly the closest I've ever been to one. They are fabulous creatures. And lo and behold, another beauty on the same visit with the same friends, this wonderful brimstone butterfly, probably fresh out of the chrysalis, I should think, and dried and in beautiful condition. But look at that camouflage. Look, you know, it's on all the leaves, which are spotted with some sort of, I don't know, is it a fungus or something? But even the butterfly even has a spot on its wing, which looks rather like the spots on the alder leaf. Incredible. And here's a big dragonfly from Bickershaw that you don't often see very close to. This is a brown hawker. You much more often see that you can tell them because they're big, and they have these wonderful golden colored wings when they're on the wing, going up and down between the trees. You don't often see them in the resting position like this. Fantastic to get a chance to take a picture of one like that. And yet another spin-off from this year's botanical surveys. My first ever record of a ringlet butterfly locally, and I think it was the first ever recorded sighting of ringlets at Bickershaw, which was this July, and we recorded it with GMEU. There were about 9 or 10, so they were obviously moving into the area. And as I shared it with various people, it became obvious that there was quite an influx of ringlet butterflies into the various parts of the area where they hadn't been seen before. So that's good news. Quite difficult butterflies to recognize unless you see the underwing when they settle. And the ringlets there are very obvious then. And another Bickershaw butterfly, the common blue, on the open grassland, a real grassland specialist species. That's the male, and then the female, just as beautiful, not as strikingly blue, but she has these beautiful spots around the margins of her wings. And another one that we saw several times during our botany work was the small copper. Again, not a particularly common butterfly locally, but it's been a good year for them at Bickershaw. Great to see. And when you're in amongst the flowers and the grasses, it's sometimes good to see some of the day-flying moths too. This is a shaded broadbar, the commonest of the day-flying moths, very much prevalent in July and August. Much more difficult to see and photograph these wonderful latticed heath moths, another day flyer. And look at the way the pattern on the wings is also reflected on the patterning on the body. I think it's one of the most delicate and beautiful creatures you could imagine, really. Very, very small and not easy to get so close, but when you have a 500mm birding lens, you can actually sometimes use it for a sort of semi-macro shot like that. Wonderful creature, as is this one, the yellow shell, a little bit easier to photograph. And this one much more common, really, I suppose, commonly seen. This is the 5-spot burnet, which you've probably seen out on grassland, not just at Bickershaw, but it's quite unusual to see it with its wings open like this. And look at the usually you can just see the spots on the black wings as the wings are closed. The wonderful red panels on the underwing, which are usually hidden. It's lovely to see. Something that became obvious in later July and through into August was all these webs on the bushes in the southwestern meadow, scattered around. There were dozens and dozens of them at one time on one of our trips. This is actually the nursery web spider. This web is not something that is there to catch prey, but it's there to form a home for the developing spiderlings. And this is Mum, very attractive lady spider there. Maybe the drama is turning to a horror movie for some. These adults hunt using stealth and speed. They don't trap their prey in webs at all, but they use their webs for looking after the young. So they lay their eggs and the young develop in the web. A little bit more botany before we leave summer. In the southwestern meadow area, common centauri is a real star of the show. Specializes in that sort of post-industrial shale, the drier areas, as does this lovely flower, the yellow wort. We've seen this year both at Bickershaw and on Ramsales Ruck at Pennington. Not a particularly common flower nationally, and a lovely one to see, definitely a favorite. As is the eyebright, another showstopper, but you really need to get close because the individual flowers are really tiny. And then this one, the hare's foot clover. We looked all over the place for this because we knew it was there, we'd seen it before. But it wasn't till the GMEU day when we had the visitors there, when Mark Champion was with us, he stumbled on it on the edge of the southwestern meadow there. And there it was, this delicate plant growing in this sort of what you would say is a very uninviting coal shale substrate, but obviously loves it there and is doing very well. One remarkable thing about the flora of Bickershaw is how they are working together with the fungi and the bacteria to actually clean up the spoil. And even heavy metal deposits and poisons like mercury and copper can be processed by the biological systems and purified. This is a common spike rush, very, very humble sort of organism really, but it deals with copper and zinc and removes them from the soil. This is yarrow with a flower bug enjoying it on the top there. But it's also fantastic at dealing with mercury deposits left by industry. And the grasses get a look in on this task too. This is the humble tufted hairgrass growing on another 4x4 track, a little bit of a flood there. And this is good at dealing with zinc, apparently, zinc deposits in soil. So you see the drama is going on underground and in places where you least expect it, and even the insignificant extras can play a much more important role than we really realize. But in the wooded area, the jays are beginning to show signs of collecting and caching acorns for the autumn and the winter. The grassland has a distinctly bad hair day look to it, and the swallows are collecting together, and you get that feeling that they're thinking about leaving. Yes, it's autumn, and first pink-footed geese are flying over Leigh, maybe on their way to the wash for the winter. And this autumn we had the privilege of seeing a wonderful migrant wheatear, not very far from where the Haresford clover was blooming just a few short weeks beforehand. Another big part in the drama of Bickershaw, a passing migrant on its way from the nesting grounds, perhaps up on the fells of the Lake District, or who knows, up in Scotland, or in the coastal rocks somewhere, and just stopping off to catch some food, to catch some insects at Bickershaw there. You wonder where it comes from, you wonder where it's going to, but you hope that it's finding plenty of insects among the varied habitat of Bickershaw to get it souped up for the next stage of its migration. Meadow pipits are passing through too. I wonder if there will be a time when they return to Bickershaw in greater numbers. This chiffchaff looks as though it's in two minds whether to start a journey south or maybe even to stay in the UK, as some of them are doing now, to save energy. The same story with the blackcaps. The blackcaps, some of them are staying the whole year now, perhaps because of climate change. Here's one that's stocking up anyway on some blackberries before it decides whether to go south or not. Just to round off the cast of thousands in the Bickershaw drama, we've seen something of the wonderful fungi there this autumn. An incredible variety and incredible numbers of fungi there were in sort of October, November time, no doubt being a bit decimated by the recent frosts. Can't be that hard, can it, to recognize fungi? Well, you go out with a book, but the variety is absolutely mind-boggling. And the names are amazing. They sound like the hobbits of the Shire. There are brittlegills and roundheads, milkcaps, dapperlings, brackets, bonnets, and scaly caps. Few are as perfect as this blusher, which was photographed just a few weeks ago. And this is a stunning brittlegill. We think it's the bloody brittlegill, or it could be the less common scarlet brittlegill. The jury is out. I don't know whether we will actually decide or not. And this was a white saddle fungus, which was just lying by the side of the path near Fir Tree Flash. Apparently not that common in the area. Another wonderful one to see. And here's sunrise over a common earth ball, pretty obvious on the mossy ground. They stick around close to the ground, and then they, like a puffball, they explode, releasing hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of spores to the surrounding area. You have to get lower still to photograph this impressive but diminutive blackening wax cap. As it gets older, it does just what it says on the tin. It gets blacker and blacker the older it gets. And these little characters, the drama goes on right down to the lowest couple of centimeters. While we were looking at the wax caps, Jean noticed these. This is the hairy earth tongue fungus, a wonderful name and fascinating to see. You can see how small it was by the size of the grass blades and the moss right next to it. Definitely one of the smallest bit parts on the stage, but no doubt playing who knows what vital role in the soil. So that brings our drama well and truly up to date, really. Autumn is really here. We're almost in winter. By the side of the road to nowhere, the stone chats are going nowhere. They stay put. The redwings are already back. The field fares, one or two field fares in the trees there. And I'm afraid you've probably missed the full-on autumn colour. With the winds we've had in the last few weeks, the leaves are pretty much off the trees, aren't they? But the drama goes on with Bickershaw. We haven't had any autumn music yet, so maybe we'll use an autumn song just to close the show.